to kick us off then.
Sure. Everyone, thank you so much for being with us. My name is Terrence Hood, and I'll serve as Assistant Director for Alumni and Student Athletes and Interim Associate Director in our TCU Career Center. And Kim Sots is also from the Career Center. We have athletics that have been collaborating. We're just excited that you all have joined us today, and we want this to be as engaging and informative, as inspiring as possible. So for our student athletes and international students who are on, please take advantage of this opportunity. Use the chat to ask questions. We want this to be, again, informative. We want you to be enlightened by the information. Yesterday, we had an awesome international alumni panel. This is day 2. So we're keeping the conversation going. We're so excited for our employer partners, Lennox International, Alcon, Verkada, NBC Universal. Thank you so much for being with us. So with that being said, I want to turn it over to Mr. David Swaim, who will have our panelists introduce themselves so that we'll get right into our conversation.
Thank you, Terrence. My name is David Swaim. I'm an immigration lawyer in Dallas. Our firm has worked with and represented TCU for about 40 years, believe it or not. I have been in charge of that for about 30 years. So we not only provide seminars to the students each year about the immigration process available to them after graduation, but we also represent the university as a client. So for employment-based immigration, we work with the university to help professors and in a limited sense, researchers, but primarily those that teach. So that's my involvement, and I think I'll be addressing some issues later on. So thank you, TCU, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so we can have our panelists introduce themselves. Lexi, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Lexi Williams. I am the campus recruiter and intern program manager over at Lennox International in Richardson. Very excited to be here, very involved with our campus hiring. So this sounds like a great opportunity that TCU's provided to hear from some employers. So thank you for having me.
Kristen, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, my name is Kyrian Marrow, and I work at Alcon, which is in South Fort Worth. We are the world leader in eye care. We make contact lenses, lasers for surgery, things of that nature. I work in HR on global employee relations. And what we focus on, besides making a lot of the HR policies, we also work, I also manage the audits that Alcon experiences from a financial and a labor perspective.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you for being here.
No worries.
Julianne, would you mind sharing more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Julianne Barroso, and I'm with Verkada out in Silicon Valley, specifically in San Mateo, California. For those of you who have not heard of Verkada, I would not be surprised if you guys haven't, but we are a startup, about a 4-year-old company specializing in video surveillance and video security. Ultimate goal for the company is to be like the ultimate command platform for video surveillance and security for smart buildings. I know it's a very heavy statement, but I would love to tell you guys more. I am a sales recruiter with the company. We definitely are recruiting for roles and internships across all departments, but my specialty will definitely be in the sales department. So I'm happy to meet you all and happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Julianne. And we have Anita Johnson with NBC Universal.
Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here. I am actually a research director with NBCU. I work with the global distribution and international team. So while I am not in recruitment, I can share things with my HR team. And many of my colleagues, some are located here, but most of my colleagues are located outside of the US. And I spend most of my day working with our UK team. I've been with NBCU for about 10 years. I am a TCU alum, so I'm happy to be here and looking forward to chatting with you all. Thank you.
Anita, thank you so much. Do we cover all of our employer partners? I think we did. All right. So David, I'll turn it back over to you, sir, and we can get started with our questions and our discussion areas for today.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to touch briefly on a couple of points that kind of overrun the situation where students graduate and they go on to their optional practical training or OPT, and then hopefully later on through the H-1 and the green card process. This area or this issue comes up quite a bit with student athletes. And for that reason, I know that TCU and employers are very focused on the concept that the degree that the individual receives at graduation from TCU is the degree that must be required for the position that's accepted with the company. So in other words, and this is an example that John uses, if we have a tennis player, a very accomplished tennis player who graduates with a degree in communications and for whatever reason is unable to find a position after they graduate, but they have a year of practical training, going and giving tennis lessons is a violation of that status, because obviously we don't give out degrees as tennis coaches, and at any rate, this student athlete doesn't have one anyway. So it's very important both for the optional practical training or OPT and the H-1 that there be a direct connection between the degree just received, not the degree that was awarded 4 years ago, but the degree that was just received matches the position and is required for the position. Now for the H-1, we can use degrees that were granted previously. We're not stuck with the most recent degree. But for OPT, for that first year after graduation, they must match the most recent degree and the position. So having said that, I think the best thing to do is to open up questions. I will be happy to entertain them. I know a lot of the other panelists will be able to help out as well. So Terrence, how would you like to handle the questions?
Sure, David, we can go right into our main question. We have 4 discussion areas. We want to open up to our employers to just chime in. And so the first, I would say, question for our employer panelists, from a company perspective, what are the benefits to hiring international students and what are some potential challenges?
I'll go ahead and start. I also didn't specify that Lennox International is an HVAC organization. So if you haven't heard of us, check your backyard or your basement. You might see one of our AC units or heaters. But this was a great question because I think with especially international students, we see all the time, it's about diversity in a lot of different ways. It's about diversity of thought, diversity of skill, diversity of just personality and how they are able to interact and work with their team. And for what I've seen personally is the work ethic. A lot of times international students have other jobs on campus and they're coming into the organization and they're ready to learn. They want to be kind of molded and trained, whatever they need to do. And a lot of times they also have other certifications and things that they bring to the table that you wouldn't think that we needed in a candidate, but then it was a big value add in the role. So that's one of the big benefits that we see.
And to piggyback off of what Lexi was saying, she made like some really great points, which I 100% agree with. To top that off, diversity is going to be a #1 factor across all companies that you all would probably talk with. Aside from diversifying the actual workforce, at the end of the day, the more backgrounds that we have on like the workforce, the more diverse views we have, the more diverse perceptions. At the end of the day, that's like a lot of cooks in the kitchen, which makes for like a better recipe at the end of the day. And a lot of the talents that get brought onto the team, especially from international profiles and personalities, sometimes you can't find that from local talent. So it's definitely like a huge advantage.
Well, I can mention really quickly, most of my day-to-day and at least my department, we sell our series to people around the world to different channels and streaming services. So for us, it's vital that we have someone who's present in APAC. We have someone who's present in across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, that we have someone who's in Australia. So for us, and Miranda can speak more to the recruiting part of that, it's vital for us to have people who are familiar with those local regions. Yes, we have a pretty decent team on the US side, but it's critical that we have people who are local too.
Hi, I'm Miranda. I work with Anita. I'm the HR generalist supporting Anita's business. So I just wanted to chime in with her too. One thing that I think is great about hiring international students is oftentimes, like Anita mentioned, we need people who are familiar with the culture of those specific regions, who speak the language. And so obviously that's something that can be found with people who are from the US, but that's something that is also a key characteristic of a lot of international students and a lot of international hires.
Yeah, and I see a question in the chat. Dustin's asking, is that backgrounds as in experience or in culture? And so Dustin, I know at least at Alcon at our company, it's both. And so I know TCU offers a number of postgraduate degrees. So let's just think for the graduate students who might be listening to this particular talk, some folks, depending on what their degree path is, might have gotten their first degree, worked a little bit, and got their second. For example, I know that TCU's MBA program is very prestigious, and I know we recruit from that program as an example. And so, a person like that would bring a lot of experience from their work between degrees as one. And it's common in different cultures throughout the world that you might work first and then go back to school. And then definitely as in culture, I know that has already been mentioned as well. And thinking of our own company, Alcon just spun off from their parent company last year in 2019. So we are, as they call it, a $7 billion startup. So we have a new identity as a new company, but we have 70 odd years in the Fort Worth area at working as a global company. The reason why that's important is there are a lot of cultural nuances. So Julianne was talking about being in sales. So what cultural nuances international students bring to the thought process as we launch products, like Lexi was mentioning, bringing in diversity of thought, but also subtleties within the eye care space. For example, how likely are patients to get reading glasses when they're over 40? Well, Katie Couric, for example, changed the market in the US because then all of a sudden it was cool and hip to wear reading glasses at 40. Before then it wasn't. And so what are the other cultural nuances that, an international student or just thinking of you as a professional would bring to, how do we plan our products? How do we launch our products? And lastly, I'll give you another example as we design our products. So, for example, my background is in chemistry. I work in HR, but my background is in chemistry. And in my previous career, I worked with supercomputers. And at that time, the way supercomputers are made is that they hire a small framed human, I kid you not, and the person takes all the wiring and plugs all the main frames together because they got to get in the tiny little spaces, okay? So you would think, for example, in a supercomputing market, as an example, a person that's of a small frame, which might be common to a certain ethnicity. I should mention I'm 5'2", so I'm a short person. So that would be an example of a place where you would be valuable. But as I mentioned, you can see that there's a number of different spaces where that background and experience and culture really comes into play.
Terrence, if I could, let me jump in and throw something completely out of left field into the mix. One of the things that we discuss with the students at the seminars and also with employers when we do employer seminars is that if the company is having an issue with retention, One of the built-in advantages of the F1 student process after graduation is that it takes literally years. And after about 4 years, the student only has one of two choices: either stay with that company until permanent residence is granted, or leave the United States, because they're not probably going to be able to get back into F1 status. So on average, according to the career services people at TCU, US workers leave their first job in 22 months. Foreign students, F1 students, are going to be stuck, if that's the right word, in the company and actually in the same job for on average 7 years. So if retention is an issue, then F1 students have a built-in advantage that comes along with the process that they have to go through. They're not promising, I'll stay with the company for 7 years. They have to stay for a period of time because there's no other way to get through the process. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in as kind of an additional benefit that F1 students bring to the table.
David, thank you so much for sharing that. I'll turn it over to Kim for our next question. And again, this is a conversation, so anytime students, please share comments or questions in the chat, but I'll hand it over to Kim.
Thanks, Terrence, and thanks, David, again for mentioning that benefit, because that definitely is I'm sure our employer representatives here would agree, it is a challenge. Retention is definitely a challenge, and as you said, David, these employers spend a lot of money onboarding and training and developing talent. And so definitely retention is a high priority and therefore a big benefit as to hiring an international candidate. I'd like to kind of segue into some of the skills that you think are desired just kind of across the board by companies in the current marketplace. If you can share, what are some top skills that you're looking for in candidates? And I realize that they may vary from role to role, but in general, what are some of the top skills so that our students can spend time now, making sure they're developing them? And alternative, and kind of the flip is, are there any gaps in skills that you're seeing that you think that it would help make them more marketable if they took time to develop those skills now? And anybody want to start out? If not, I'm happy to call on folks.
I'll start.
Great, thanks, Kristen.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So like Kim mentioned, specific skills vary position to position. So instead, I'll focus on what do the most valuable people at Alcon do? Like, for example, there's a number of adages where, the most valuable person at a company can go from, a different type of role and succeed at multiple ones, right? There's also a benefit of a human that is able to stay in one type of role for a very long time and expand their expertise. So for the students, you're absolutely familiar with that ladder model because that's what professors do. And I mean that very respectfully, right? They have an expansive knowledge in one particular field. They grow that over time. They develop new collaborations, publish in different journals, things of that nature. They might stay a professor their whole career, and that is fantastic. Or they might move over to administration. Maybe they become a dean. I'm not familiar with TCU's model. I went to Penn State, but a number of schools like Penn State, MIT is another one, will want to privatize technology that's developed there. So there's a whole office and procedure for that. So that would be like an example of another place they might go. So using that same type of mentality, I would say that the most valuable people at Alcon are the people that create all kinds of partnerships and that are interested in learning. And I don't say that to overwhelm, but rather, focus on, just like when you were a freshman in college, focus on learning the first thing and getting really good at, your gen ed. So for the new graduates, get really good at your role, learn the specific, of your sphere. And then maybe start to reach out, have a networking meeting with somebody that you interface with on a different team, and just keep doing that. Whether the rule of thumb at Alcon used to be once a month, but even less than that, like every few weeks or something of that nature. The second thing I would say, and to be colloquial, the most important thing is to go outside and talk to people. Normally we call that networking, but I mean that, even bigger. Maybe you join the local basketball team in your town and there happens to be an attorney on it. You're not an attorney, but you learn what attorneys do or what their specific field is or things of that nature. So I would say that the most valuable people, aren't afraid to learn, get outside their sphere, and then, do something fun. So to answer your last question, Kim, about skill gaps, I would say that many professionals, not just the newer graduates, struggle with networking. And historically, when I've done conversations like these in the past, students are afraid to approach senior professional or approach, they're like, well, I don't even know Kim. I mean, would she go to lunch with me? I'm like, well, ask her, But the other thing is, I think the most important thing to remember about networking is, first and foremost, you're paying the other person a compliment. You're going up to Kim and saying, wow, I think you're really interesting, your role that you do, or the type of experience you had. Or in my own case, I'm thinking about what my next career move might be within the company, but in general. And so I'm like, okay, well, maybe I should talk to other humans that have done that kind of thing. And although they don't know me, but I always start the question with, hey, I really like your job. Can you tell me about it? I just want to learn, more things. And people are certainly interested to share. And I think most people have a very special place in their heart for the new graduate because we each were one. Every single person on this call, we were once a new graduate. And I think that it's important for new students to remember, and not just international students, but most students seem to have that kind of question.
Thanks, Kristen. I think, we had a panel yesterday with some of our alumni, and one of them mentioned, what's the worst thing that could happen if you asked? Someone will say no. And that's really not that bad. And in this case, if somebody says no to lunch, it's probably because they're busy. And, they're probably going to say, could we do it another time? So there's really no downside. Lexi or Julie, Anita, Miranda, any of you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. Oh, does someone else want to? Miranda, is that you? I'll go ahead and start. So I think two things that we look for in all candidates are those interpersonal skills as well as the technical skills, depending on the role. Those are sometimes non-negotiables, but what I can see differentiating a student or anyone looking for a job is that grittiness. So students that have jobs on campus or are student athletes or are doing a million clubs at once or are able just to find resources to help them in whether it's the role or get the contact information of a hiring manager, that to me shows that extra level of determination that they're going to come into the organization, go above and beyond and get the answers they need by figuring it out and using the resources rather than asking for someone to be able to do that for them. I'll give you an example. I actually just talked to a student earlier today who had an internship where he had this huge project that he didn't know a lot about. He didn't know a lot about the system. So he ended up realizing that the company offered courses on learning the system. So he took these free courses and was able to complete his internship project in half the time. So by going above and beyond and just utilizing his resources that were there for him and taking an extra step, he was able to really wow that team. And I think students that think outside the box and have that sort of grittiness and resourcefulness will really showcase what they can do and really stand out when it comes to any sort of role or any sort of internship.
And
can I ask a question? So I just wanted to ask Lexi to define grittiness for international students. Gritty is close to being a colloquialism. So maybe tell them what it means to be gritty, because they probably they won't all have seen that word.
That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that out, because I think people can have almost a negative connotation with gritty. Gritty, I think, can be translated a couple different ways. For me, it's being able to be given a problem instead of like, I don't know how to fix it, utilizing your resources, doing extra research, asking questions, taking feedback, relying on the people next to you to be able to get enough information to figure out that problem. That for me is kind of grittiness, just taking an extra step above what you're given to figure something out.
So I'll go ahead and go next. It's funny, Lexi, I was actually going to say grit as one of my points too, and I'm happy to tell everybody like my definition of it. But my answer as far as skills goes will definitely be like a broader answer, but I think it's interchangeable whether you do want to be in sales or marketing or operations, etc. Especially as a new grad, you know, it's kind of hard at the end of the day because you apply for these entry level positions and you go into it and they expect you to have like 5 years of experience. It's a terrible feeling to have. It's more of the reality of like the job search. But at the end of the day, I think what's important is that yes, you will have like the hard skills, like learning the softwares that you need to have. But I think the soft skills are definitely just as important. So soft skills can be defined as like your dependability, your creativity, your competitive drive, your coachability. And as far as like hard skills, I think the one thing that our hiring managers ask for across the board at Verkada is two things. It's your project management and then how excellent you are at something. So that's where grit kind of comes into play. So grit at Verkada is just defined as like perseverance and passion for anything towards any type of goal. So in any entry level position, as long as you're able to display that you were good at something, whether that was a sport or, you know, you had to like haggle like time management, just anything that you had to put time and excellence into to being successful, really comes a long way. And then to answer the question in regards to skill gaps. So again, sort of a broad answer, but I think it's important to learn how to be a really, really great storyteller, especially when you start the interview process. I think I learned it the hard way when I had first graduated and started interviewing that, you know, if the person is constantly following up with follow-up questions, it's probably not the greatest interview. But if you're able to kind of share your story in terms of why you became an athlete, why you're looking at this job, what skills you can bring to the table, and what skills you'd like to learn and bring to the table, 100%, the person that you'll be talking to at the end of the table will be listening, will be thinking like, hey, I can see this person in this role, but I just need to do A, B, or C. So that's also where coachability comes to kind of play. I have a great example. We actually have an associate account executive that just actually, she's interviewing with the team right now, but she's an international student. She's from Saudi Arabia. You know, some of the hard skills that we were looking for weren't there, but really what got her to the stage was the storytelling. She was able to share like all her successes and why she wants to be in a sales role. And at the end of the day, you know, the team saw the resilience, and it's almost like even if it didn't work out, she would not take no for an answer. Definitely take this with a grain of salt. It may not work with other industries, but in sales, it definitely works great. So.
Just chiming in really quick off of what Julie mentioned about having those soft skills, working with a lot of hiring managers in a lot of different industries, especially looking at the layer of like an entry-level role. Like Julie mentioned, when you don't really have a lot of work experience, one of the biggest things that I always see hiring managers ask for is, or ask the question when they're interviewing somebody is, does this person have a strong desire to learn? So they might not have a lot of experience in the industry, or they might not have a lot of work experience, but have they portrayed in the interview that they are really willing to learn and really excited to learn and to be adaptable and to have that grit. So I think if you can get that across in any interview, whether that's an informative interview or you know, an actual interview that you're having with a recruiter or hiring manager, being able to portray that you're willing and excited to learn, will go a long way and help make up for that skill gap that you might have.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. You know, as you guys were talking, you know, I definitely heard some themes there. You know, curiosity, eager to learn, coachability, grit. And you know, I think back, you know, all of you who, you know, traveled to the US to seek an education in another country and assimilate into another culture, you know, demonstrate all of those qualities and skills every single day. So don't shortchange yourself. Definitely, you know, recognize that you know, your story already exhibits those traits, and then through your academics and education, you're just building on them. So you've heard it from the experts here, you all have, you know, some of the top skills and traits that employers are looking for, and a really compelling story to demonstrate them when you're talking with employers. With that said, I'm going to pass it on to Terrence to follow up on some additional questions. And again, if you have any questions of your own, feel free to put them in the chat. And if we don't get to them in this conversation, we will definitely follow up with you after the session.
Thanks, Kim. And I wanted to also echo from yesterday that I heard some keywords like showcase, display. So that's the idea of having a body of work or evidence of your skills. So whether it's a portfolio or a LinkedIn profile, nowadays it's not only what you know, but it's what you can prove. Evidence of your skills, examples. So please take that to heart. I think that's really consistent messaging. What we tell in our appointment to international students, have good examples of your skills. So I want to shift gears just a smidgen here for our panelists here. We talked about skills and benefits to hiring international students, but from our panelists here, could you share with our international students what are some available internships and full-time opportunities that you currently have available at your companies, or those that might be anticipated for those who might want to apply at your organizations? Julianne, would you mind starting us off with Verkada?
Yeah, of course. I was actually just going to pull up our job site link so I can link it in the chat. But we are hiring internships for our engineering team most heavily. So that goes across like our access control team, our software team, our hardware team, lots of teams there that I wouldn't be able to name them all, but definitely heavily hiring for them. We are still finalizing the internship opportunities for the sales team, but I do know we have opportunities available for sales operations. So if anyone is into like analytics and numbers, definitely the internship for you. And then marketing and our channel team as well. And happy to talk to anyone further if they are interested.
I can go next. John Kyung, I see your question in the chat. I'll weave that into my answer, and so we can do two things at once. And so at Alcon, it's intern season, as we say. So we currently have our internships posted on our website. Like Julianne, I'll add it in the chat, but it is alcon.com/careers. We have full-time opportunities globally. So if you wanted to stay in Fort Worth, for example, we have a number of opportunities in Fort Worth. It is our North America headquarters, but we do have locations throughout the US and naturally a number of markets worldwide. And so in terms of specifics, I will also mention that I had a previous career as a researcher and a professor in chemistry. So I can relate to a person with their PhD and concerned about the types of publications that they have. At Alcon, we are really looking, I'll speak to the R&D space for a minute, because that's really the largest concentration of PhDs that we have. Although I know your field is in English. We don't look specifically at what journal you published in or what exactly was your topic area, but rather we're looking for specific skills. And so I'll just say, for example, we make contact lenses. They are made of polymers. So we are looking for people that have polymer type experience. And if you have a publication, that really communicates to the employer that you are internationally recognized in your field, and that as many peer review processes work, that your peers have found your work to be very sound and adding to your field. And so I would say that it really just polishes your resume. We, in my own case, I don't have a lot of publications from my postdocs, so it's not like that was held against me, quote unquote, if you will, but rather it does just show that I can speak the language of a researcher and I know what the research process is. And so if that, I know you're in English, so if you have more questions, just put them in the chat and maybe we can find a way to answer them.
I'll go next. We have a variety of internship and full-time positions. Our corporate office is in Richardson, but our research facility is actually in Carrollton. So that's where we house all of our engineering teams. They're basically creating, designing all those products, so heavy in the IT and engineering. And then in our corporate office, we have all sorts of opportunities, being it is that corporate headquarters. So marketing, finance, accounting, again, IT, HR. So really kind of everything you can think of, which is great. So the good thing about Lennox too is that when you intern with us, we look to bring you on full time and get you exposure to even other areas of the business. So you're able to kind of do different leadership programs and rotational programs to understand all of the facets of Lennox. So I as well will put our careers page in there. We are hiring for our summer internship, so very exciting. So I'll share that with you guys, and yeah, definitely connect on LinkedIn if you want to see other information about open roles.
I put some links in the chat as well for the internship program and then our career site as well at NBC Universal. So I believe spring applications might be closing now, but keep an eye out for internships for the summer. And I think one of the kind of nice things that's come out of all of us working from home is that you have the ability to do a lot of these internships remotely. So you don't have to move to Los Angeles or to New York, where the bulk of our employees are in the United States. You can do those kind of from wherever you're located in the United States, which I think is a great plus and helps to get that diverse talent that we're looking for.
Great. Anyone else have anything to add? I think we covered everyone, and appreciate you all putting those links in the chat. And if you don't mind, if you do have a LinkedIn address you'd like to share, maybe including that as well. Kind of following up a little bit already on what you all have shared about your employment opportunities. Could you share a little bit more about the recruiting process? I know some of you mentioned, kind of when you start recruiting, what the timing is. Many, just in general for everyone's information, many major companies do start recruiting in the fall for summer internships and for May graduates. So in general, we do recommend you start early. Of course, every company is a little different though. And if you all would like to share what your timeline's like, and also give a little bit more detail about what that interview process is like, and if there's anything in particular that you'd like to, share advice-wise on resumes or interviews, that'd be very helpful. I know that's asking a lot, but just feel free to share what you think would be helpful to this group. Thanks.
I can kick us off here. Our interview process varies a little bit on the role. I'll focus more on the internship end since that's more of my forte. Usually it's around 2 to 3 interviews. Sometimes we do include different assessments or what we call challenges. If it is a more technical role, we'll just give you an assessment to complete so that we can really test your skills and abilities. In our interview process, we start around, I'd say August, September, really when school kicks off, so that we can attend career fairs, get involved with universities, and we get probably around 50 to 60% of our internship positions filled by the end of your fall semester. So you definitely want to start early. I can't emphasize that enough. That doesn't mean that if you wait till spring that things will close up. We definitely have opportunities. I know a lot of employers do, but you definitely want to get in front of employers sooner rather than later, because the interview process also does take time. Sometimes it's quicker than others. It really just depends on the hiring managers and sometimes your availability. I know students are just finished up exams, so it was harder to get kind of those interviews done. So my advice would just be patient and ask for clarity, whether it's around the timeline, whether it's around the assessment. I have some students that ask a lot of questions, which are great because then they're getting all the information they need, and some really don't ask any questions, and so sometimes aren't as prepared. Us as recruiters will do everything we can to make you feel comfortable and be transparent to the process, but definitely think about the things that you're looking for, that you need to know about an opportunity, because it's also an interview for you as well.
Anyone else like to add to that with respect to their company?
Sure. At Verkada, we are actively interviewing for internship opportunities currently. And then for those of you who are graduating next year, I definitely say start the interview processes now for any company that you are interested in. In particular, Verkada, we typically will start pushing for final round interviews, probably around February or March for May or June graduates. So it honestly does vary. I think the sooner that you get a foot in the door, the better it is to, I mean, who wouldn't want to secure a spot and a job in the market once you graduate? That's like the dream for everybody. Since I am talking, Kim, someone in the chat actually asked a question in regards to salary negotiations. I'm happy to kind of touch base on that. So the question was, since as international graduates, we are somewhat conditioned to stay with the same company for years, what is a good approach to negotiating salary and upward mobility in the company? So Vanessa, I think you sort of answered your question in your question. So the number one thing, Lexi made a really good point. When you are interviewing with a company, you are also interviewing for yourself as far as like this being the perfect opportunity for you. So Vanessa and the rest of the group, when it comes to negotiations and salary, I know it is very intimidating. You're like, I need this job. I want to just be thankful for what I have and I'm given. But at the end of the day, I think these are questions you should ask in the interview process. So you should ask them like, hey, what is the upward mobility as far as salary? Typically our compensation change every 6 months, every year. As far as that, is this the last step in as far as this role, or what's the upward trajectory like? So these are just questions you have to ask in the interview process, because at the end of the day, you know, sometimes it's expectation versus reality, which you never want to be stuck in. Being that you would have to be there long term, again, all the answers on the table, as much details as possible is definitely the best practice for you.
Thanks, Julianne, for answering that question. That's a tough one, no matter what stage you're at. You're right, though. You have to ask. And, you know, even when you get the job, you know, you ask, and it may be asking your manager, it may be asking HR. And if the answer is no, then the next question might be, is there something specific that I should work towards? You know, in order to be considered for this next role? Or is there another time that you would recommend that we revisit this? So no doesn't always mean no forever. You know, keep that in mind as you advance in your career. And sometimes it's yes, but you don't know until you ask. Anyone else want to talk a little bit about their company's recruitment process, or any specific advice you'd have for students on resumes or interviews? Any pet peeves that you see on resumes?
I have one thing, not a pet peeve, but just my recommendation to you know, people who are entering the workforce is, when you see a job posting or a role that you're really interested in, don't feel like you have to hit every single kind of requirement on that job description. If it's something that you're excited about and that aligns with your interests and your education and your experience, if you meet most of them, I always encourage people to apply and kind of just go through the process. And as Lexi and Julie have mentioned, kind of see if the company and the organization and the team works well with you, but don't ever not apply because you think that you don't meet 100% of those qualifications.
That's a really great point, Miranda. And I know there's been some studies done where females in particular often kind of select themselves out of applying because they don't think that they meet all the requirements. Often there's a section that will say preferred qualifications, and then there may even be a section that's carved out with more kind of, you know, required. So, you know, you might just, you know, make sure you read the job description carefully. And as Miranda said, don't self-select yourself out. You know, being familiar and being eager to learn goes a long way, as these representatives have already shared with you. Let's see. So We did have another question just about pay. Do you have any like suggested language on how people can phrase the question of starting salary or a raise? Because it otherwise feels a little awkward. So if you have any suggestions on that, just, the specific wording, that would be helpful. How would one of you approach asking about your salary or a raise if you were on the other side of the desk? Hate to put you on the spot, Kristen, but you have any suggestions?
No, that's okay. I was thinking of a few examples. So I'll share a few. I will say for my most recent job, the job I'm working in now, I do, Dustin, I'm with you, finding the right words to not make the pay conversation awkward. And then what part of the interview process to bring it up. That's cool. This is right where I was going. So for myself, I'm in a place where Kristen, I feel like I'm trying to get better at that place. To Kim's point, I don't try to self-select. I've worked to get over that in terms of the job requirements. But I'm also trying to be aware that statistically female and newer career professionals are not paid as much as they should, for the newer career professionals or for counterparts when it's women that we speak of. And so what I try to do if I'm really pushed, so for those who do the hiring, if I'm really pushed to come up with a number, I say, well, you know what, I was really thinking that I would ask for, you guys were just gonna pick a number. I was really thinking that I was looking for 80,000 to 90,000. And I would suggest Dustin and others always to give a range, just so that just shows that you're flexible, if it's 82 or, one time I made a salary that was like, XY $1,500. Like, what's $500? But anyway, that was my salary. And so, yeah, so I would just say that. And then Vanessa, to your point, where to bring that up in the process, Kristen, try to wait longer in the process. And the reason why I do that is, I just tried to sell them on me as a candidate first. From some of the reading I've done, that is typically the process. And so just to really talk about suggested wording, Dustin, just to give you another, script, if you find that helpful. One of my coworkers at Alcon, she always says, Kim, I'll just pretend if you were interviewing me, Kim says to me, Kristen, what are your salary expectations for this role? One of my coworkers always says fair market value. That's what she always says. She doesn't say a number. She says fair market value. So Julianne, I'm just thinking if instead of Fort Worth, we were out in Silicon Valley, y'all know that the cost of living is a lot higher out there. So fair market value for Julianne's job in Silicon Valley is going to be different money than fair market value in Texas. The cost of living is smaller, and in Texas we don't have state income tax for the U.S. based students. Just to say, we don't have to pay taxes on top of our wages to the state of Texas, which you do in most states. And so the amount of money that you make is less in Texas, but the amount of money that goes into your bank account can be more. So it's one of those things just to kind of think about. So yeah, and then we did also, I think, have a question about student athletes and job shadowing, but just to touch on that quickly, because I don't want to miss anybody. At Alcon, we do job shadowing once you are selected and brought in for an internship. So for student athletes, as an example, we have roles posted all the time, all year round, and we have typically intern season is now, but we do have co-ops that will post from time to time. And we're starting to post some college type opportunities throughout the year. So that might be a way that you can get creative with your scheduling. So Kim, is there anything else that you wanted me to add, or is that the type of question we were looking for?
I think that covers it. Thanks, Kristen.
Sure.
Looks like David has a question that, I think like many of our students are probably wondering, and, you all panelists may be able to provide some insight. Your companies do hire international students, but I think David's asking whether David, why don't I just let you ask it?
Well, I'm curious, and I think students are curious about why some companies just simply refuse upfront to interview F1 students on campus. They put notices out that, you know, we will not interview you if you are an F1 student or need sponsorship. And I've always been curious about that. I can certainly see why companies would be reluctant if they've been through the process and it didn't work out well, or, you know, whatever it may be. But to have this flat refusal to cut out a significant fraction of the student body that's graduating, it just strikes me as odd. I mean, I thought maybe I've never been able to figure it out. I've asked companies, recruiters that work for those companies, and they just tell me it's company policy, which isn't really an answer. So I thought maybe somebody would have some insight into that.
Sure, I can go. So at Verkada, you know, we definitely do sponsorship and all of that, but at a previous company that I did, we did not. And honestly, what it really comes down to is the budget. You know, money is going to be a huge factor at the end of the day. So within like huge corporations or even like the companies I've worked for, so I can only speak for my experience, but headcount gets into play a lot. And within headcount that's available within different departments comes budget. And sometimes the sponsorship opportunities aren't available because of our budget. That's sort of my perspective. I mean, Kristen, Lexi, Miranda, I mean, you guys definitely share your experience, but that's typically my take on why, you know, my previous company did not take part of it.
Because that would be because the view is that the sponsorship process would cost a lot of money.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd agree. In my experience, that's been the case. And I think some hiring managers maybe wrongly have this idea that they don't want to hire a student, an international student, as an intern because they want to convert them to full-time. And if the lottery doesn't work out, or, you know, they lose that student then, or they lose that candidate to join us full-time, or not be able to stay on longer than that year or two. So I think it's just maybe not knowing exactly all the information. So I think sometimes hiring managers will want to stray away from it. But it's good to, I think, have this conversation so that students can understand kind of the employer's perspective too, and then understand how to be able to combat that conversation or focus on the organizations that are open to sponsorship, because a lot of times it really isn't a discussion. A lot of companies will say yay or nay. And sometimes it does depend on the role too. Some of our engineering IT will absolutely sponsor. Some of our finance, they won't sponsor. So being candid in those conversations and really asking that question, I think is really important. And I'm glad that we're bringing that up.
Great, thank you.
And of course, there are, you know, some industries like government agencies that are prohibited from hiring international talent. But, you know, all these other, our comments or conversation was more about those industries that don't have that prohibition. So, yes.
Sorry, Alonzo here. I'm sorry, I don't have my video on. I have a question which kind of dovetails with David's question. So how do we kind of navigate a situation where we may be applying for postdocs, pre-docs, fellowships, etc., but there is this restriction that, you know, you have to be an American citizen or you have to have a green card. Is it even, does it even make sense to apply? Because what happens is that significantly reduces the opportunity for us to, you know, be accepted into a postdoc, pre-doc, or fellowship opportunity.
Well, from an immigration perspective, there's a lot of different ways to address that. If we're talking about the world of academics, it's usually university policy, and it's usually fairly well thought out, as opposed to private industry, where a lot of times decisions are made based on pretty poor information. But if you're talking about going to a university, there's not much you can do about it, because they either have government relationships that that come into play, or they've just made a university policy. They're not going to put people in that role. One way to get around it, though, and I know several of our clients have used this, and I don't want to go too far off the path here, but if you are looking to go into academia and become a professor, for example, and in order to get the postdoc, you have to have a green card. One of the best, easiest ways to get a green card now is to get a job at a community college as some type of teacher, an instructor. And you should have a green card in 13 or 14 months, unless you were born in India or China. And that solves your problem. It puts you a year behind, but it gets you the green card, and then it opens up all those options for you. So that's a little bit off topic, but we've had a number of people do that.
You know, I'll add one thing just for all international students to note. In your first year, the correct answer to the question is no, you don't have to be sponsored, because our office will handle all of the filings for your paperwork. And so you should be having an honest conversation with your HR about the fact that over the long term you will, but in the short term, it's our office that's going to file for your paperwork. So they don't have to file. They don't have to take any steps other than to file the I-9. So that's one thing to bring up. And then if you are a science major in this group, the other good piece of news is that that's actually a 3-year deal. That for the 3 years that your STEM degree is in play, our office will handle the filings and the updates and things like that. We're going to do it in conjunction with you because we can't do it. We can't just do it on our own. You have to help us with that, and your employer has to have, for instance, E-Verify certification and things like that. But we do support that ourselves, and their HR office doesn't have to do anything other than to convert the I-9 piece of your employment. David, I have a question for you,
Yes, sir.
and it's partly a huge debt of appreciation to all of our employers here for noting your flexibility in hiring students who don't necessarily have the degree that that the job is posted under or something like that, that you're flexible to still look at them. Immigration law is pretty strict that there are some restrictions on that. So David, my question to you is, in looking at it from a positive, how would a company that wants to hire an international student, and let's say that the job is at with Verkada in the Silicon Valley, but the job itself is not related to IT, but might be related to something else. How do they go about hiring an international student for OPT in a situation like that? Is it possible to do and still stay within the bounds of legality?
Well, the devil is in the details. It depends on how far away it is or how far apart they are between the degree and the job. And I know you are very strict on the OPT side, and the Immigration Service is much more restrictive now on the H-1 side than they used to be. So it really depends on the details. If we're talking about different occupations, it's certainly not going to work. But if we're talking about the same occupation, but the company requires X, and the OPT person has Y, but has experience in X, that's when we get into issues. The OPT is even harder then, because it really doesn't matter what experience they had. It's based on the degree. H-1s are more flexible in that regard, because they might have a chemical engineering degree, but most of their work was done in computer engineering. So that is a little wiggle room we have on the H-1, but not on the OPT. So again, to answer your question is the same thing lawyers are hated around the world for. It depends.
And I think the great thing is that, you know, TCU through John and through David, Mr. Swaim, you know, you have great resources who can talk you through this and make sure that you're following the rules, and who can also help share information with you know, the employer that you're talking to as well, and be a support there, because just like we want to support our students, we want to support our employer partners too, and we want to make, you know, we want to make it work. So, you know, keep that in mind as you're going through the process. And the Career Center, of course, can be of help there as well. Thank you all for being so, you know, willing to share, and, you know, based on your knowledge at your current company and your past experience as HR professionals. I think the last, you know, kind of question we wanted to ask you all is really just, do you have any last words of wisdom for our students, you know, just in general, and particularly with regard to them being international students? Any last, you know, words of wisdom or tips related to their job search? And
well, one thing I don't want to
go ahead, David.
And we discussed this last week. John has copies of a 2-page pamphlet that discusses the retention issue. So if you run into a company that's not really that wild about hiring F1 students or sponsorship, that information can be useful to kind of educate a potential employer about the advantages. It may not convince them entirely, but at least they'll have some additional data to go by. So John has those, we obviously have it. And it was produced by our law firm. It's all from me. So you can copy it, give it out to whoever you need to. But we've had a few instances, unfortunately rarely, where a company actually changed their mind and said, oh, this looks like an opportunity we might want to look at. So you never know. But anyway, John has access to those.
And if you don't mind, we'll hold off on that last question for just a few minutes, because this is a perfect segue to asking one of your fellow students, Bernadette, to just briefly share what her experience has been in her job search and the success she's had. Bernadette?
Yes, Kim, I'm here. Hi, everyone. My name is Bernadette. So I interned this summer, and yeah, let me just say I left a very good impression, only to receive a rejection letter a month later. So I inquired about that because I was sure that I was going to get a return offer. So I inquired, and they're like, well, you would need sponsorship. So we thought it would be better to move on with other candidates. But the important part is I had made great connections with the president of the department I worked in, and she asked me to talk to the global head of HR, and that was when he found out that HR did not let him know that I was a STEM major and I could work for 3 years. So I think this is important because lower level HR employees are just there to get the job done and get as less top candidates as possible to the decision makers on who to bring on board. So while you intern, I would just say leave the best impression of yourself as you can, as we intern this summer virtually. So it was a little more challenging to leave that virtual impression. But also I would recommend that make those connections. If you have a senior executive as a great connection, they can be your biggest advocate in like your path to returning to the company for full term. So yeah, I would just say you can follow up as much as you can to the lower level HR employees, but if the seniors don't know it, you may not get the cut. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share. And now I received a full-time offer starting February. So that's really how I kind of advocated for myself and just had advocates from within the company who were senior executives, because the lower level HR employees didn't let them know what was up for me.
Good for you.
Yeah.
You.
And, you know, you know, they, you know, you also have to recognize that, you know, our recruiters have very high demands put on them to hire across the board, across the company. And so, you know, when you do make a connection with somebody at whatever level in the company, it's always great to continue to stay in touch with them and follow up and you know, make your goals known. So that way, if they're able to help, as Bernadette mentioned, then they are able to do that. And that's not always possible with our recruiters because they do have very large demands as far as, you know, positions that they need to fill and connections that need to be made. But I know that they're all very happy when the right candidate gets hired. So thank you, Bernadette, for sharing that. And we're also happy for you. I know you saw everybody clapping and cheering for you. So with that said, and being mindful of everyone's time, I'd like to kind of circle back to that last question. If you all have any tips or words of wisdom, and Anita, we'd love to hear from you too, on to share with our students and alumni. We'd really appreciate it.
Well, I am happy to share, and Terrence has heard this before. I was a grad student when I went to TCU, and I found my first media job through the TCU Career Center. So please make sure that you are utilizing those resources that are available to you, because that put me on my path to end up at NBCU after I found my first media job. So by all means, if you have not reached out to your career counselors, please do. They are there and wonderful and happy to help you, I'm sure.
I can go next. So basically 2 tips that I can give everybody. One is basically find a mentor. So whether that's a mentor at TCU, a mentor at like a prospective company that you're looking at, a mentor like in the field, don't be scared to like gain those relationships, whether that's like through networking in person or maybe like on LinkedIn. Just say like, hey, I'm a student. I would love to be in your shoes one day. Would love to chat like bi-weekly. When I was in school, I actually had a mentor that I spoke to, contacted her through LinkedIn. I was really surprised she replied, but talked to her every 6 months, became a really, really great relationship. Didn't work for a company that she was at, but where I'm getting at with this is that she became a champion for me, which is something that's always awesome. So definitely recommend that. And my second recommendation and tip is definitely, if you don't have a LinkedIn, make a LinkedIn, kind of jazz it up as much as you can with all the information that you feel is relevant to your job search. As much as important as a resume is, full disclosure, as like a recruiter, I probably 80% to 20% always look at a LinkedIn before I pull up a resume. For the back end of how we look for candidates is that we typically just are LinkedIn all day. Lexi and Miranda, you guys could probably agree with me, but we're on LinkedIn every single day, probably all day. And at that point, we ask for a resume following up that. So the LinkedIn is definitely like the first impression and super important. So out of all of this, definitely update the LinkedIn. That's like the #1 thing that you all should do.
My, I guess, parting words of wisdom is really focus on that relationship piece. I know we talked about networking, and obviously right now we can't do a lot of in-person networking. So a lot of that communication is via email, via LinkedIn. I can't tell you, and all of our HR professionals will agree, how many messages we get a day. So really what you want to do is kind of stand out by really being genuine in your communication and trying to build a mutual serving relationship rather than a transactional relationship. I have people that would just send me their resume and say, hey, I want to apply for this job. And I'm like, all right, well then go apply online, right? Or I have other people that are genuinely interested in starting that relationship and continue to keep up with, even if it's not a mutual fit or a role that fits them right now. So that's really how you want to approach right now, especially those virtual relationships that you're having. Second, I would say, don't give up right on the job search. I know it's probably really difficult in general being an international student, let alone the world that we live in of 2020, and probably it's going to kind of continue to 2021, but don't give up. Use your resources. You have a great team at TCU that is world-class that will help you succeed. People generally want to help you. Recruiters, that's our job. So approaching it with some empathy and some grace, I think can really help you get your foot in the door with an organization and really help you make a name for yourself. So appreciate you guys even being on this call. You guys are already ahead of the game, learning to what best to do. And I'm sure you all will find awesome opportunities.
That was great advice. I'm going to take it a little bit different. And so far we have talked all about your professional self. And I think that mental health is extremely important. It's something that we should each speak about and remember and make a priority all the time. And so I'm going to give you advice, tips, and tricks that aren't professional, like as I would say the last comment, and that is, focus on self-care. I'm the first to tell you I'm terrible at doing that. That's why I know it's so important. So if you have a specific exercise regimen, or like I said, join a community sports league if that's your thing. When I was at Penn State Chemistry, everybody had a hobby. I was a dancer, somebody else had a community garden, a lot of people cooked, you know, whatever it is that makes you feel special. If you're an artist, Anita, I noticed your painting, it's very cute, you know, things like that. So make sure you focus on that. And then just broadly have a life, you know, have friends, go out. If you like to shop, you know, be fashionable, whatever it is. Because I think, you know, your whole human self is what the world needs. Your job needs your best professional self, and that's enriched by your whole human self. So I would really focus on that. And then again, just to make sure we get all the questions, in the chat, somebody was asking about, does your degree make a difference to the resume reviewer? And like David, I'll use everyone's least favorite answer, and that is, it depends. And so I'll just give you an example of my current role. It's a bachelor's plus 5 years of experience makes me eligible, a master's in a few years, or PhD in 0 years. So since I do have my PhD, if I hadn't finished that degree, then I wouldn't be eligible for this job. I mean, I'd be eligible for another job, but you know what I'm saying? So I think that depends. When it comes to internships, for example, sometimes we have PhD level internships, as just to, you know, follow your example there. And so again, you'd miss out on that particular opportunity. We might have another opportunity, or we might be able to remake that opportunity to fit a master's level in this example with your few years of experience, but that's not always the possibility. And so I definitely hear you. There are people sometimes that need to get out in the workforce immediately, and sometimes finishing up the degree isn't realistic. I will tell you, my first role at Alcon, when I left academia, I published 3 journal articles the first year. So you can absolutely finish up and work it on the side if you needed to. I wouldn't recommend that to a friend. It was very busy, but you can do it. So yeah, so if there's any more comments there, maybe we can take them at the end, but those what I would offer.
My main piece of advice would probably be to stay in touch with the people that you go to school with, stay in touch with friends and those types of connections, because that's your network, right? Especially right now when you're starting out and you might not have a lot of work experience. Those connections that you have is truly your network. So, maybe there's not an opportunity right now, but you never know, a couple years down the line where their careers will take them, where there might be an opportunity for you in their network as well, right? That's how we're all connected so broadly, is through kind of those interconnected webs and bubbles that we all have. So I think that's one of the main things. Those referrals, if you know somebody who works at an organization that you would really love to work at, reach out to them and find out, hey, you might not have an open role in your organization right now, but I would love to work there. So let's keep in touch and have coffee, even if that's someone, 5 years down the line that you went to school with and maybe haven't kept in contact. Keep up those relationships and those friendships, because you never know what position you might be in later, or what position they might be in later as well.
Did everyone get a chance to share some last words of wisdom? David, do you have any?
Kim, I just had a closing thought or two. One is, somebody mentioned earlier about the TCU International Office and Career Services. And I'm not tooting my own horn, but I work with a lot of different universities, and they're not all the same, like everything else in life. But TCU has an International Student Office and Career Services Office, which in my opinion is surpassed by no one or no thing. It's really an incredible resource. They're wonderful people who know what they're doing, and the students and the alumni need to take full advantage of that, because that is not always true out in the real world. It's not even true at other universities. So take advantage of it. It's a great, great resource. And my final comment is that I want to live where Lexi lives. That looks like waking up in a
I wish it was
Caribbean
real.
resort every morning. If that in fact is your home, it's just gorgeous. So
I wish. That's what I am, but it is unfortunately just a Zoom background, as you can tell by my disappearing
oh
limb.
darn.
David, you can live there. Lexi, you'll have to send him the Zoom background.
Yeah, that's what I need. That'll be a lot cheaper.
That's awesome.
Oh, well, this was excellent advice from all of you. I'm going to turn it back to Terrence to close us out, but thank you all for sharing.
Hey, Terrence, before you close it out, just one quick thing. David referred to a 2-page concept paper on the on hiring and why you should hire an international student. Because I am the same age as David and I have the same digital skills, you cannot get that through my box. So what I need you to do is send me an email, and that includes you employers. Just send me an email and I'll share that with you. Just note that David's website right now, they're undergoing some changes, so that website is not valid. But just send me a quick request to j.singleton.tcu.edu, and I will send you his why to hire an international student. For international students who think, well, gosh, I already know why they should hire me, it's a great thing also to share with your employers. And the last thing I'll add today is to remember that an in at these companies often is not going to necessarily be the recruiter. If you've been working with somebody at a company, they often will go to your recruiter and talk to them and say, hey, we really like this girl. She's really bright and really on the go. So there's more than one way to get access to those jobs. So a huge thank you to everybody.
And Alonzo, thank you, sir. I totally agree. This has been very illuminating, inspiring, engaging, illuminating. I have all types of adjectives to describe this session, all wonderful things that we have just learned and heard. So I just want to thank again, Lexi, Julianne, Anita, Miranda, Kristen, John, Mr. Swaim. Thank you for everyone for attending. I have nothing else to add, everyone. I just want to thank you so much for your time and stay plugged into the Career Center. Everyone stay safe and go Frogs.
Great. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.